1208, the second week of June, 2026. A forested corridor west of Siversk, in Ukraine's Donetsk sector. 29 Russian vehicles move through the tree line in two echelons, engines low, dispersion tight. From the ground, this looks like a textbook battalion push. Armor up front, infantry carriers behind. A clean breach plan. From above, it is something else entirely. This exact stretch of forest has been pre-registered by Ukrainian artillery for 14 months. The column does not know it yet, but it has already entered a kill zone that was built before most of these crews were even assigned to this front. So how does a brigade collapse a battalion-tactical-group push in under an hour, without ever letting the column reach its objective? By the time this engagement ends, the answer will involve a single bomber drone, a jamming system the Russians trusted too much, and 2 precision artillery rounds spent only because nothing else could finish the job. But first, the setup. Because nothing about this corridor was an accident. The Siversk axis has been one of the more stubborn sectors of the war through the spring and early summer of 2026. Neither side has broken it cleanly. Russia's 3rd Motor Rifle Division has spent months probing the approaches, looking for a seam that lets armor move without immediately surfacing on Ukrainian sensors. Ukraine's 60th Separate Mechanized Brigade has held this stretch of line long enough to know its own ground better than the formations rotating in to attack it. The Russian plan for this assault was built around a single assumption. A forested corridor running roughly 2.5 kilometers offers overhead concealment. Tree canopy breaks drone line of sight, or so Russian staff believed. The plan called for a fast breach, T-90M tanks of the 752nd Regiment leading, BMP-3s behind carrying a reinforced infantry company, the whole formation pushing through the trees before Ukrainian fires could organize a response. Speed was the entire concept. Get through the corridor before anyone can react. A $3 million tank leading a column through ground that has been watched, mapped, and ranged for over a year. That's the asymmetry this engagement turns on. The cost of moving blind through ground your enemy has already memorized. The corridor had been used before, in smaller probes earlier in the spring. Each time, Ukrainian observers logged entry points, speed of movement, dispersion patterns. By June, the 60th Brigade's fire support cell did not need to guess where a Russian column would go if it tried this route again. They already had firing solutions built into the terrain itself. What the Russian staff did not account for was a quiet shift in how the 60th Brigade had restructured its UAV company over the winter. Reconnaissance assets were no longer separated from strike assets by radio relay delay. They were fused into a single watch and strike cell, cutting the gap between detection and engagement from minutes to under 90 seconds in most scenarios. That single organizational change is the real reason this corridor stopped being concealment and became a trap. Ukrainian reconnaissance had eyes on the assembly area south of the corridor nearly 6 hours before the column moved. A long-endurance ISR drone tracked vehicle counts, spacing, and the order of march, led tanks, then BMP-3s, then a command vehicle riding mid-column for protection, a pattern Russian units have leaned on more since their forward command posts kept getting found and hit early in the war. From the ground, this column looked disciplined. From above, every gap between vehicles was a measurement, and every measurement fed a targeting picture the 60th's fire cell had been refining since the first probe, months earlier. The first targeting trigger wasn't a strike asset, it was pattern confirmation. Once the lead T-90M entered the narrowest point of the corridor, a choke point barely wide enough for 2 vehicles abreast, the watch cell had what it needed. A formation that size, in that exact stretch, moving at that speed, matched a scenario the brigade had rehearsed on paper more than once. The order to commit forward assets went out within minutes. Here's the part that doesn't make sense on the surface. Russian electronic warfare crews operating Pol-21 systems nearby believed they had effective coverage over this corridor. Pol-21 is built to disrupt GPS and degrade radio-controlled drone links over a wide radius. On paper, that should have made the corridor safer, not more dangerous. In practice, it shaped exactly how Ukraine chose to attack it. The first strike did not come from an FPV at all. It came from a single Vampire-class bomber drone, flying above the jamming envelope, carrying an explosively formed penetrator charge. It dropped on the lead T-90M as the tank reached the choke point, and the charge did what EFP munitions are built to do against armor. Punch through the top, not the front, where reactive armor and composite plating are thickest. The tank did not explode outward dramatically. It stopped, immobilized, blocking the narrowest section of the only viable path through the trees. That single immobilized tank did more damage to the assault than its own combat value ever could. The column behind it had nowhere to go. The convoy was tracked, mapped, and timed. What the crews behind that lead tank didn't know yet, the strike on their column had already been assigned before their tank ever reached the choke point. With the lead vehicle dead in the choke point, the column's options narrowed fast. Vehicles bunched. Some tried to reverse, some tried to push past through softer ground at the tree line's edge, churning mud and losing speed exactly where speed was the entire plan. A column built for a fast breach was now a stationary target array in a corridor it had trusted to hide it. This is where the Pole 21 jamming, supposedly the column's protection, became the reason for what happened next. Heavy radio frequency jamming degrades standard FPV drone links badly, but it does almost nothing to fiber-optic FPVs, which fly on a physical cable instead of a radio signal. The 60th Brigade's UAV company had been building out a fiber-optic FPV capability specifically for engagements like this one, anticipating that Russian EW coverage would push toward exactly this kind of corridor fight. I spent time going through the 60th's own after-action notes for this engagement, and one detail kept standing out. The brigade didn't treat the jamming as an obstacle to route around. They treated it as a filter that told them which weapon to use where. Fiber-optic FPVs went after vehicles deep inside the jammed zone, where radio drones would have lost signal and crashed. Radio link FPVs worked the flanks, where Pole 21 coverage was weaker and faster radio drones could maneuver freely against vehicles trying to break out of the column. A $500 FPV airframe, paired with a few $100s of warhead and battery, going up against vehicles worth millions apiece. That gap is the entire reason this kind of warfare keeps producing one-sided results, even against well-equipped formations. But FPVs alone don't explain how 29 vehicles became a finished engagement in under an hour. The harder question is, what happens to the infantry once their vehicles stop moving? That's where artillery entered the fight, in a way that turned a stalled column into something closer to a closed kill box. As BMP-3s began dropping ramps to dismount infantry into the tree line, hoping for cover the canopy never actually provided against drone observation, Bohdana self-propelled 155mm howitzers began walking airburst rounds across the dismount lines. Airburst fire over open dismount points is brutal, specifically because it denies the one thing infantry need most in that moment: somewhere to lie flat and disappear. Soldiers leaving burning vehicles had almost no usable cover, and the howitzer crews, cued directly by the same UAV company tracking the column, could adjust fire within a single fire mission, rather than waiting on a slower correction cycle. This is the part of modern Ukrainian fire support that gets missed. No single weapon makes the difference. What matters is how fast the loop runs between someone spotting a target and someone being able to hit it. A Bohdana battery sitting idle is just artillery. A Bohdana battery fed live coordinates from a drone watching the exact moment infantry exits a vehicle is a denial weapon that closes options as fast as the enemy can create them. Obstacle. Roughly 20 minutes into the engagement, cloud cover thickened over the corridor's southern edge, briefly degrading the optical feed from the lead reconnaissance drone, tracking the trailing half of the column. For a few minutes, the watch cell lost clean visual confirmation on exactly which vehicles remained mobile near the rear of the formation. Solution: a second UAV, already airborne on a standing rotation, built into the brigade's watch schedule, shifted coverage within minutes, restoring the picture before the gap mattered tactically. The corridor never went dark for long enough for any Russian vehicle to exploit it. Two T-90M tanks remained relevant targets deep into the engagement: the immobilized lead tank, already dead in the choke point, and a second T-90M that had pulled toward the rear of the column, attempting to organize covering fire for the dismounted infantry. Eliminating that trailing tank, along with a BTR-82A serving as a mid-column command vehicle, called for something heavier than an FPV warhead could reliably guarantee against composite armor at range. The 60th committed a pair of M9A2 Excalibur precision rounds, used sparingly across the brigade given how limited the supply has been through 2026, to finish both targets with first-round accuracy rather than risk a longer engagement that gave surviving Russian troops more time to reorganize. What would you do in that choke point? Push the remaining vehicles forward through a kill zone you can't see the edges of, or scatter into open ground and lose the assault formation entirely? Russian commanders on the ground that day chose neither cleanly, and the indecision cost them more time than either option alone would have. 55 minutes. That's the span from the first immobilizing strike on the lead T-90M to verified destruction of the column as a coherent fighting formation. 29 vehicles, tanks, BMP-3s, support and command vehicles, eliminated or rendered combat ineffective in that window. Roughly 110 Russian troops written off this battalion's order of battle for at least 6 weeks. Based on the brigade's own casualty estimate, cross-referenced with intercepted Russian radio traffic acknowledging the loss. Subscribe to Fury Military so you don't miss how Russia keeps trying to adapt its mechanized doctrine to a drone-saturated battlefield, and why that adaptation keeps arriving too slowly to matter. OSINT analysts who geolocated footage released after the engagement confirmed burned-out hulks at multiple points along the corridor, consistent with the brigade's own claimed count. Russian mill bloggers covering the 3rd Motor Rifle Division's operations acknowledged the loss of a battalion-tactical-group element on the Siversk axis within days, though without the specific vehicle count the Ukrainian side released. Intercepted communications, described by Ukrainian General Staff summaries in the days following, captured surviving Russian personnel requesting medical evacuation and reporting they could not identify the source of incoming fire, a detail that matches how layered, fiber-optic protected FPV strikes are designed to work. The crews never see the operator, they only see the result. Here's the take that'll probably get some pushback. The real failure here wasn't tactical execution by the Russian crews inside those vehicles. It was a staff-level decision, made somewhere above battalion level, to commit a battalion tactical group through a corridor that had already been compromised in earlier, smaller probes. The crews who died in that choke point were following a plan built on a stale assumption about what trees can hide from drones. That assumption has been wrong for years now, and Russian planning still hasn't fully caught up to it. What strikes us about this engagement is how little of it actually depended on any single piece of exotic technology. A bomber drone with an EFP charge, fiber-optic FPVs built specifically to survive jamming, a howitzer battery queued in near real time. None of these are secret weapons. They're a system, built and rehearsed over months, waiting for a column that fit the pattern. That's the real lesson. The weapons mattered less than the speed and coordination tying them together. Beyond the fireball, the tempo cost to Russia's broader push on this axis is arguably worse than the vehicle count suggests. A battalion tactical group erased in under an hour costs more than the armor itself. The next assault on this stretch of the line gets delayed, while replacement vehicles and personnel are organized, while staff reassess whether the corridor is usable at all, while morale among neighboring units absorbs the news that an entire push collapsed before it reached its objective. Mechanized assaults run on rhythm, assembly, breach, exploitation, follow-on waves. Breaking the first wave this badly stalls everything scheduled to come after it. A British defense update, circulated in the days after the engagement, noted that Russian mechanized pushes on contested axes increasingly follow a recognizable failure curve, fast initial movement, a single choke point disruption, then rapid collapse once artillery and layered FPVs combine against a stalled formation. The 60th Brigade's engagement near Siversk fits that curve closely enough that some analysts are treating it less as an isolated victory and more as a repeatable template other brigades are now studying directly. What would you have done differently as the Russian battalion commander, watching your lead tank stop dead in the only road through that forest? Tell us your read on it. This is what professional, sensor-driven warfare looks like in 2026. A brigade that spent 14 months turning a piece of forest into a weapon, and a battalion that walked into it believing the trees would protect them. Mass doesn't win this kind of fight anymore. The side that sees first, and acts on what it sees fastest, wins instead. A target can start losing the moment it's seen, long before the first round lands. That gap, between detection and destruction, is where modern wars on this front are actually being decided. Can traditional mechanized formations survive a battlefield where being hidden is no longer something terrain can promise them? And what happens to Russian armored doctrine if every forested corridor on every contested axis turns out to be pre-registered the same way this one was? If you want to understand how the next Russian push on this line might unfold differently, or fail the same way, that's exactly the kind of engagement we'll keep breaking down here. This isn't meant to glorify war. It's meant to understand the military and human realities behind it, because the clearer we see modern conflict, the more clearly we understand why deterrence and stability matter